Sukuna summons Mahoraga and Agito. Gojo now has to fight a 3v1. Because of this, Yuta gets worried and says he is going to join the fight. Yuta is quickly stopped by everyone and they basically tell him to let Gojo do his thing. But to me and many other fans, that left us wondering, could Yuta have actually taken on Mahoraga and Agito? And in today's video, I am going to provide an answer to that question. So without wasting any more time, let's get straight into it. First, I'm going to establish the setting for this fight. Since this is more of a combat analysis and not a what if, then I won't be including any interference from Sukuna or anyone else. We're strictly talking about Yuta versus Mahoraga and Agito. It will take place in Shijuku though. Not that it really matters, but it seems fitting considering the surrounding context of what inspired this video. Now, let's just get into the combat analysis. To be straight up, most of this battle is going to rely on Yuta's ability to be able to one-shot Mahoraga, but I think that can be covered quickly. Let's get out of the way some of the Mahoraga and Agito scaling. Same with Yuta, then we'll get into the comparisons. Mahoraga is actually underrated in combat, since in the Gojo versus Sukuna fight, he's more of a support role just because Sukuna is that strong to where he steals the spotlight from Mahoraga. I feel like people underplay Mahoraga's combat ability. Mahoraga is able to keep up with Gojo and Sukuna, which is pretty significant because anyone else that would beat in that battle would be hindering either fighter. So if you think about it, Yuta admits that him hopping in to help Gojo would have been holding Gojo back. It'd be the same if someone like Urame tried to help Sukuna. In the battle of the strongest, even monsters like Urame and Yuta would be holding these guys back. So the fact that Mahoraga and Agito are being pushed by Sukuna to help him means a lot because he thinks they can hold up in this battle of the best sorcery in history. This isn't to say something like Mahoraga and Agito are relative to Gojo and Sukuna, because they're not. Mahoraga and Agito were both struggling against Gojo for sure. They never got a clean hit on Gojo. That's not just him being overwhelmed by multiple attacks or him being off guard. The true highlight of Mahoraga and Agito are just them not being left behind. The fact that they're persistent. Of course, out of the two, Agito is the weaker link and doesn't really display anything too crazy, like compared to Mahoraga. He got eliminated pretty quickly. Like even Gojo himself says that about Agito, which puts Mahoraga ahead by a good amount. And this is a testament to what I've been saying, that Gojo's statement backs up the fact that Mahoraga is to be respected because he's hanging in there better than most of the verse could. It's even consistent with his name. Like his name is Divine General Mahoraga. He isn't to be messed with. That name is of high power and authority. Mahoraga has no diff someone like Hirozu, who is insanely strong, which by the way, I have a video on how strong is Hirozu if you want to watch that after this video. But the point is that Mahoraga is actually insanely strong and overpowered, and we haven't even talked about his adaptation yet. At that point, if Mahoraga is able to adapt to your arsenal, start packing up your bags because you're about to be sent to the gulag. With someone like Mahoraga who is so OP, I started thinking, does Mahoraga have any anti-feats? Only one thing came to mind, and I simply don't agree with it. The anti-feat that some people bring up is that Sukuna said that maybe his three-finger self would have lost against Mahoraga, which obviously would downscale Mahoraga. But this statement simply just doesn't make sense. Mahoraga was surviving slashes from 15-finger Sukuna, and not even just slashes. Mahoraga survived Sukuna's domain. It got to the point where Sukuna had to use his divine technique to kill him. Mind you, 15 fingers is 75% of his full strength. Meanwhile, 3-finger is only 15%. These numbers aren't close. Sukuna's statement is just not true. Everything in Sukuna's arsenal should be weaker by 60% in his 3-finger form. So this shouldn't be phasing Mahoraga. The only way this statement makes sense is if Sukuna is just talking about Fuga. I'm not gonna linger too much on this point since I think it's pretty obvious that it's just not a valid anti-feat. Doesn't make sense, and it's not consistent with what the series has shown us. Not only that, but it might be important to also mention that it's Megami's Mahoraga. Sukuna's Mahoraga is probably even stronger, but that point isn't too important. Now, I think we've sufficiently covered Mahoraga's strength. Now we'll talk a little bit about Yuta. Don't worry, I'm not gonna prolong the video unnecessarily like some people do. Most of you are already aware of Yuta scaling, so we'll just go straight to the point and only give a highlight of necessary information. So to start off, Yuta's love beam is around the same level as Ryu's blast, Blast, who had the highest output in the Culling games, so already this is a good contender for something that could destroy Mahoraga in one blast. The downside to this is that it is a charge up, which might not be enough time for him to let it off. Yuta is called the second strongest modern sorcerer, which I think is true, but a lot of people hear that and freak out, so let me explain myself a little bit. Out of the heavy hitters, Yuta is just on the higher end, but Hikari and Maki are still on the same level. They're comparable but not exact. Yuta himself was confident in his ability to take on Mahoraga and Agito, which doesn't seem unrealistic. Like, I don't take his statement to mean that he'll beat them, but that he'll be able to take off some heat from Gojo. So let's cover any of the other abilities that could help Yuta get rid of Mahoraga. To be honest, the only one that could maybe help is Jacob's Ladder, but Yuta's Jacob's Ladder just seems weaker than Hana's, since it didn't really do anything to an already weakened Sukuna. Meanwhile, Hana nearly ended the series where she hit hers on 15 Finger Maguna. Considering that Mahoraga survived Shrine, his wheel didn't even get destroyed with Fuga, I don't think Yuta's Jacob's Ladder is doing the job. It's not gonna extinguish Mahoraga's adaptability because it's not a curse technique. It's an ability, which is something the series has distinguished. And Mahoraga isn't a curse, he's a Shikigami. So Jacob's Ladder isn't gonna be as effective. For sure, I think Love Beam would be the thing that can eliminate Mahoraga. Another factor I would like to talk about is how Mahoraga's adaptation would handle Yuta, because since Yuta copies techniques, then he just has a bunch of different techniques in store. So would that mean that Mahoraga would have to adapt to every single one of them individually, or could he just adapt to all of them just by adapting to the copy technique? Realistically, I don't think this matters much, because if it isn't something that could one-shot Mahoraga or destroy him before he could adapt, of course he'll just end up adapting anyways. As we already covered, the only true contender to do that is Love Beam. The other techniques are good, but they don't have that one-shot onslaught potential. This should be a pretty good fight. I mean, Mahoraga and Agito are going to be applying a lot of pressure, but luckily for Yuta, it isn't a 2v1. It's a 2v2 since he has Rika. I think the person who would have the most trouble is Agito, just because he's the weaker one out of the three, but even then, he's still somewhat of a threat and can't get rid of easily, because if Yuta slices off a limb, Agito has RCT, so Yuta's gonna need something a little bit more powerful to take care of Agito. The problem is, if he starts using his other techniques, this gives Mahoraga the time to start analyzing and adapting to the technique. I think Yuta's best chance at beating Mahoraga and Agito are just by summoning Domain and doing something similar to what he tried to do to Sukuna. What Yuta should do is try to use Curse Speech to freeze Mahoraga and just use Love Beam. The only problem with that is, first of all, Curse Speech isn't going to give Yuta enough time to charge up the Love Beam and blast Mahoraga. Like, if that's all it took, he would have just done it against Sukuna, and Yuta didn't do it against Sukuna, so it probably doesn't give him enough time. Second of all, Mahoraga needs to be basically still get hit by the Love Beam. And do you really think Mahoraga's just gonna stand still and let himself get hit by Love Beam?
Fight you, I would kill you if
John,
you did some
do you
stupid
think?
shit like that.
So John, do you think I'm just gonna sit there and let you kill me, John? I mean, really?
Like, come on, that's obviously not happening, and there isn't gonna be a sure hit from Love Beam because it's not a curse technique, it's just a CE blast. In the off chance that Curse Speech is able to freeze Mahoraga and Agito, then they both would just get wiped by Love Beam, but it seems really unlikely. And that's another thing, Agito is gonna be there too, and if Rika tries to stop Agito, then the Love Beam just isn't happening because Yuta needs Rika by his side. Maybe if it was just Mahoraga, it'd be easier, but yeah, since it's a charge up, this really puts Yuta in a bad position. So then in Yuta's domain, if he's just using techniques over and over, he's just gonna be giving Mahoraga free adaptation points. And if it keeps going like that, Mahoraga will just adapt and end up beating Yuta. At least when it comes to Agito, I can see Yuta for sure overwhelming him with an Icebreaker and the other techniques until he eliminates him. If he gets Agito out early on, this is obviously good for Yuta because then he can focus on the Love Beam strategy. But once again, this just doesn't seem like a feasible option for Yuta. Same thing goes for Jacob's Ladder. If you think that's something that can one-shot Mahoraga, then fine. But Mahoraga needs to be still for it to be effective. And Curse Speech isn't exactly something that stops high-tier characters for a long time. So Mahoraga will probably just end up being able to escape. Not only just escape, but then end up adapted to Curse Speech. And at that point, it's just GG's. In conclusion, Mahoraga and Agito probably take the dub over Yuta. Mahoraga on his own is already a challenge, but then you have the inconvenience of Agito applying pressure too. Now, if Yuta can get rid of Agito quickly, or he can freeze Agito and Mahoraga for enough time and get off a full Love Beam Blast, then Yuta wins. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe. If you guys have any video ideas, make sure to let me know in the comments, and if I do your idea, you will be shouted out in that video. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.